High schooler vanished during prom night in 1995. 30 years later, a locked trunk revealed the truth. The dust particles danced in the single beam of light that managed to pierce through the grimy basement window of Lincoln High School. Ms. Clara Reynolds pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she descended the creaking wooden stairs, her footsteps echoing in the forgotten depths of the building she had called home for 37 years. At 62, Clara had seen 3 generations of students walk these halls. She had watched the school transform from a modest brick building into the sprawling complex it was today. But what she hadn't expected was to spend her final year before retirement sorting through decades of accumulated memories in the basement storage room. Centennial renovations, she muttered to herself, quoting the principal's enthusiastic announcement from last month. Time to make space for the future by clearing out the past. The basement smelled of old paper, forgotten dreams, and something else she couldn't quite place, something metallic and cold. Boxes upon boxes lined the narrow corridor, each one labeled with years that seemed to blur together. Homecoming 89, Graduation Programs 03, Student Council Archives 97 to 02. Clara had volunteered for this task partly out of nostalgia and partly because she couldn't bear the thought of strangers rifling through the school's history. These weren't just dusty relics. They were fragments of lives, moments of joy and triumph that deserved respect, even in their final resting place. She had been working methodically for 3 hours when she reached the farthest corner of the storage room. Behind a fortress of faded homecoming banners and broken plastic chairs, something caught her eye. Unlike the cardboard boxes that surrounded it, this was different. A weathered leather trunk, its brass corners tarnished with age. The trunk sat alone, as if it had been deliberately hidden. A small, yellowed label was tied to its handle with string that looked ready to disintegrate at the slightest touch. Clara squinted in the dim light, trying to make out the faded writing. Prom 95. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. That year was etched in the school's unofficial history, not in any yearbook or official record, but in whispered conversations that had gradually faded to silence over the decades. Emily Vaughn. The girl who vanished on prom night and was never seen again. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she tried the trunk's latch. Locked. Of course it was locked. She felt around the edges, looking for any give in the old leather, but the trunk had been built to last. The brass lock, though tarnished, remained stubbornly secure. Mrs. Reynolds? A voice from the stairs made her jump. You still down there? Yes, Miguel. She called back to the school's head janitor. Miguel Santos had been keeping Lincoln High spotless for 15 years, and if anyone could help her with a stubborn lock, it would be him. His work boots clomped down the stairs, and soon his concerned face appeared in the storage room doorway. You've been down here for hours. The principal said not to push yourself too hard. Miguel, I need your help with something. Clara gestured toward the trunk. Can you help me open this? Miguel approached cautiously, his flashlight beam sweeping over the trunk. When he read the label, his expression changed. Even he, who had started working at the school a decade after the incident, knew the significance of that year. Mrs. Reynolds, are you sure about this? Maybe we should call someone first. It's just old prom decorations, Miguel. What harm could there be? But even as she said it, Clara felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Something about the trunk's placement, the way it had been tucked away so deliberately, suggested it contained more than forgotten corsages and dance programs. Miguel returned with his toolbox, and after several minutes of careful work, the lock clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo through 30 years of silence. Clara lifted the lid slowly, half expecting it to creak like something from a horror movie. Instead, it opened smoothly, as if it had been waiting all this time. The first thing she saw was fabric, a dress, carefully folded and preserved in what looked like acid-free tissue paper. Even in the dim light, she could see it was a prom dress from the mid-90s, deep emerald green with delicate beading along the bodice. It was beautiful, elegant, and completely untouched by time. Beneath the dress was a rectangular object wrapped in plastic. Clara lifted it carefully, a camcorder, the kind that was popular in the 90s, still in its protective casing. And beside it, a manila envelope, sealed and labeled in careful handwriting. To the principal, open in 30 years. Miguel crossed himself. Mrs. Reynolds, I think we need to call the police. Clara stared at the contents of the trunk, her mind racing. Emily Vaughn had worn a green dress to prom that night. The detail had been mentioned in every newspaper article, every missing person report. Her mother had described it to police, emerald green with beading, bought specially for the occasion that was supposed to be the highlight of her senior year. Miguel, help me carry this upstairs. And yes, call the police. Call the school board too. Clara's voice was steady, but inside, her heart was pounding. I think we've just found Emily Vaughn's prom dress. As they carefully lifted the trunk, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were carrying more than old artifacts. They were carrying secrets, secrets that someone had intended to keep buried for exactly 30 years. The label on the envelope haunted her. Open in 30 years. It was 2025. 30 years exactly since Emily Vaughn had vanished into thin air on what should have been one of the best nights of her life. Someone had been counting. Someone had been waiting. And now, 3 decades later, the truth was finally ready to surface. As they reached the main floor, Clara paused at the trophy case near the entrance. Among the awards and school photos was a small memorial plaque she had helped install years ago. In memory of Emily Vaughn, class of 1995. Forever in our hearts. Soon, Clara realized, that plaque might need a different inscription. Because Emily Vaughn wasn't just a memory anymore, she was evidence. And after 30 years of silence, she was finally ready to tell her story. 3 days later, Detective Sarah Chin sat in the Lincoln High School conference room, watching a ghost come to life on the laptop screen. The old VHS tape from the camcorder had been carefully digitized by the police department's tech specialist, and now 30-year-old footage flickered before an audience that included Clara Reynolds, Principal Morrison, and Emily's mother, Margaret Vaughn. Margaret had aged into a fragile woman of 73, her once auburn hair now silver-white, but her eyes still held the sharp pain of a mother who never got answers. She clutched a tissue in her weathered hands as the footage began to play. The first few minutes were exactly what you'd expect from a high school prom video circa 1995. Teenagers in awkward formal wear swayed to music that sounded tinny through the old camera's microphone. The girl's hair was teased high with enough hairspray to damage the ozone, and the boys tugged uncomfortably at rented tuxedos that didn't quite fit. There she is, Margaret whispered, pointing at the screen. Emily Vaughn appeared in the frame, radiant in her emerald green dress. She was laughing, spinning with her date, a nervous-looking boy named Tommy Chin, who Clara remembered had moved away the following year. Emily's smile lit up the entire screen, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders as she danced without a care in the world. Detective Chin paused the video. Mrs. Vaughn, is this how you remember your daughter that night? Happy, Margaret said simply. She was so happy. She'd been looking forward to prom for months. That dress cost me 2 weeks' wages, but seeing her face... Her voice trailed off. The detective resumed the footage. For several more minutes, it continued showing typical prom scenes, group photos, awkward slow dances, teachers chaperoning from the sidelines. Clara recognized several faces, now grown adults with children of their own. Then the mood of the footage shifted dramatically. The timestamp showed 10:47 p.m. Emily appeared again, but this time she was outside the gymnasium, near the school's main entrance. The happiness had drained from her face, replaced by something that made everyone in the conference room lean forward, determination mixed with fear. She was holding a piece of paper, a letter, and her hands were shaking as she read it. The camera was positioned at an angle that suggested whoever was filming was trying to remain hidden, possibly behind the decorative plants near the entrance. You thought you could cover this up? Emily's voice came through clearly, though she was speaking to someone off camera. Her tone was accusatory, brave despite the tremor in her voice. I have proof right here. The camera wobbled as if the person holding it was startled by Emily's words. Falsifying transcripts? Changing scholarship results? Emily's voice grew stronger, more confident. Daniel Whitaker doesn't deserve that acceptance letter, and you know it. He barely maintained AC average, but somehow his GPA shows straight A's? And now he gets the full-ride scholarship that should have gone to Marcus? A male voice responded from off-camera, too muffled to make out clearly, but his tone was pleading, desperate. I don't care about your excuses, Emily continued. This isn't just about grades. This is about stealing opportunities from kids who actually earn them. Marcus worked 3 jobs to keep his grades up, and you're just going to let some rich boy take his future? The camera angle shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, they could see Emily's face in profile. She looked older than her 17 years, weighted down by the burden of the truth she'd discovered. Detective Chin made a note. The Whitaker family, they were prominent in town. Principal Morrison nodded grimly. Daniel Whitaker Sr. owned half the businesses in town. His family was influential. Still is. Margaret Vaughan's face had gone pale. Emily mentioned something about a scholarship that night. She said there was something wrong at school, but I was so focused on taking pictures, making sure she looked perfect. Tears began streaming down her cheeks. I should have listened. On screen, Emily took a step forward, extending the letter toward whoever she was confronting. I'm giving you one chance to make this right. Fix Marcus's records, give him back his scholarship, and maybe I won't take this to the police. The response from off-camera was sharp, angry. Emily stepped back, suddenly looking more like the scared teenager she actually was. Don't threaten me, she said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. I'm not afraid of. The footage cut off abruptly with a scream that made everyone in the conference room jump. But it wasn't Emily's scream. It was whoever had been holding the camera. The rest of the tape was blank. Detective Chin closed the laptop with a snap that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. We need to find out who Daniel Whitaker is now, and we need to track down this Marcus that Emily mentioned. Clara found her voice first. Daniel Whitaker Jr., he'd be in his late 40s now. His father passed away about 10 years ago, but the family still owns most of the downtown area. And Marcus? She paused, thinking. Marcus Williams. He ended up going to community college instead. Never did get that scholarship. Margaret Vaughn looked up with eyes full of a pain that had been festering for 3 decades. My baby found out about cheating and tried to do the right thing. And someone finished her for it. The room fell silent except for the sound of Margaret's quiet sobbing. After 30 years, Emily's voice had finally been heard. But now they knew that what had happened to her wasn't random, committed to protect a secret that had shaped lives and stolen futures. Detective Chin gathered her files. This is now officially a homicide investigation. Detective Chin returned to the police station with the sealed envelope, her hand steady despite the weight of what it might contain. The manila envelope had yellowed with age, its edges brittle, but the handwriting on the front remained clear. To the principal, open in 30 years. The careful script suggested a young woman's hand, each letter formed with the precision of someone who had been taught proper penmanship. But there was something else in the writing, a tremor that spoke of fear, urgency, and desperation. In the presence of the district attorney, Principal Morrison, and Clara Reynolds, Detective Chin carefully slit open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, the kind with 3 holes punched on the side that every high school student knew well. The handwriting matched the envelope, but this time the letters were less controlled, written in obvious haste. Detective Chin cleared her throat and began to read aloud. My name is Rachel Linwood, and I am writing this on May 15, 1995, the night of our senior prom. If you are reading this, it means something terrible has happened, and the truth needs to come out. I was the prom committee president, but that's not why I'm writing this. I'm writing because I've done something horrible, and I'm scared of what might happen because of it. For the past 6 months, I've been helping Daniel Whitaker cheat. Not just on tests, that would be bad enough, but on everything. His father paid me $5,000 to change his grades in the computer system. $5,000 was more money than my family had ever seen. My mom works 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and I thought this was my chance to help her. I changed Daniel's grades from C's and D's to A's and B's. I forged teacher signatures on recommendation letters. I even helped him cheat on his SATs by getting him the answers ahead of time. His father made it clear that this wasn't just about Daniel. It was about protecting the family name, their business reputation, everything. But tonight, Emily Vaughn found out. I don't know how she discovered it, but she had documents, proof of what we'd done. She confronted me at prom, waving papers that showed Daniel's real grades versus what was on his transcript. She knew about the scholarship too, Marcus Williams' scholarship that Daniel stole because of the fake grades. Emily said she was going to the police. She said Marcus deserved better, that his family needed that money for college. She was right. Marcus is brilliant, and he worked so hard for that scholarship. But Daniel's father had already made sure the scholarship committee saw Daniel's false transcript first. I tried to explain to Emily why I did it. I told her about my mom, about how we needed the money, but she wouldn't listen. She said doing the right thing was more important than money, and she was going to make sure Marcus got justice. That's when I made my biggest mistake. I told Daniel what Emily knew. I thought maybe his father could offer her money too, make her stay quiet. But Daniel's face went white when I told him. He said his father would handle it, and that Emily wouldn't be a problem anymore. The way he said it scared me. I asked him what he meant, but he just walked away. 20 minutes later, Emily was gone. I've been looking for her everywhere. Her date, Tommy, said she went outside to get some air and never came back. The chaperones are starting to panic. Some people think she just left early, but I know better. I know Daniel's father has connections everywhere, the police, the mayor, even some of the teachers. If something happens to Emily, they'll cover it up. They'll make her disappear, and no one will ever know the truth about what she was trying to do. I'm leaving this letter in the prom trunk because I'm too scared to give it to anyone right now. If I disappear too, or if something happens to me, at least someone will know what really happened. Emily Vaughn was trying to do the right thing, and if she's gone, it's because of what I told Daniel. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. The money isn't worth this. Emily deserves justice, and so does Marcus. If you're reading this, please find them. Please make this right. Rachel Linwood, class of 1995 inch. The conference room fell completely silent. Detective Chin set down the letter with hands that were no longer quite steady. Principal Morrison had gone pale, and Clara Reynolds was shaking her head in disbelief. Rachel Linwood, Clara whispered. I remember her. Quiet girl, always well-dressed despite her family's financial struggles. She was valedictorian, if I recall correctly. Where is she now? Detective Chin asked. Principal Morrison was already pulling up records on his laptop. According to our alumni database, Rachel Linwood hasn't been in contact with the school since graduation. No forwarding address, no reunion attendance, nothing. Detective Chin made notes rapidly. She said she was scared she might disappear too. What if she wasn't just being paranoid? What if she ran? Smart girl, Clara murmured sadly. She knew that letter was evidence of a crime, and she knew the people involved had enough power to make problems disappear. The district attorney spoke up for the first time. This letter changes everything. We now have a clear motive, a timeline, and a witness who's potentially still alive. We need to find Rachel Linwood immediately. Detective Chin was already reaching for her phone. I'll contact the FBI. If Rachel Linwood has been hiding for 30 years, she's probably changed her name, maybe even moved out of state. As the meeting broke up, Clara stayed behind, staring at the letter. A 17-year-old girl had tried to buy her family a better life and ended up becoming an accessory. Another 17-year-old girl had tried to stand up for what was right and paid with her life. And somewhere out there, a woman in her late 40s was living under a false name, carrying the weight of a secret that had shaped 3 decades of her life. The truth was finally surfacing, but Clara couldn't help wondering, would finding Rachel Linwood bring justice, Or would it just create another victim of the Whitaker family's power? The story broke on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the trunk's discovery. Local journalist Maria Santos had been working the story quietly, but someone leaked it to the press before she could publish her carefully researched piece. By 8 a.m., news vans lined Main Street, and reporters were shoving microphones into the faces of anyone who'd lived in town during 1995. Maria watched her exclusive story become a media circus from her cramped office at the Lincoln Herald. She'd spent weeks verifying facts, tracking down former students, and building a solid case. Now every major network was running with half the information and twice the sensationalism. Her phone rang for the 15th time that morning. Santos. Miss Santos, this is Attorney James Whitaker III. The voice was smooth, professional, and carried the weight of old money. I represent the Whitaker family interests. We need to discuss your recent inquiries regarding my client. Maria's blood chilled. She'd heard that name before, Daniel Whitaker Sr.'s nephew, a corporate lawyer with a reputation for making problems disappear through legal intimidation rather than courtroom victories. I'm sorry, but I don't discuss ongoing investigations with Miss Santos. I think you misunderstand the situation. This isn't a request for comment. This is notice that any publication of unsubstantiated allegations regarding my client will result in immediate legal action. We have documentation of your recent contact with several witnesses, and we're prepared to seek damages for harassment and defamation. Maria's hand tightened on the phone. Mr. Whitaker, I've been careful to verify every fact. The police have physical evidence, witness testimony. What the police may or may not have is irrelevant to your publication's legal exposure. We've sent cease and desist letters to every media outlet in the state. I suggest you consult with your legal department before proceeding. The line went dead. Within an hour, Maria received similar calls from lawyers representing 3 other prominent local families. By noon, her editor was pulling her story. I'm sorry, Maria. I know you've worked hard on this, but we can't afford a lawsuit right now. The Whitakers have ties to our biggest advertisers. Across town, former student witnesses who had initially agreed to speak with reporters were suddenly changing their minds. Tommy Chin, Emily's prom date, had given a detailed statement to Detective Chin about Emily's mood that night, how she'd seemed worried about something she'd discovered at school. But when a TV reporter showed up at his insurance office, Tommy's story changed. I don't remember much about that night, he told the camera, his eyes darting nervously. It was 30 years ago. Kids say a lot of things. I probably misunderstood what Emily was upset about. Similar retractions were happening across town. Former prom committee members claimed they didn't recall any unusual incidents. Teachers who had been questioned about grade changes suddenly developed amnesia about academic irregularities in their classes. The only person who refused to be silenced was Margaret Vaughn. At 73, Emily's mother had spent 30 years being told to accept that her daughter had simply run away. She'd endured decades of whispered suggestions that Emily had been troubled, that she'd gotten involved with the wrong crowd, that she'd probably met with some accident far from home. When Channel 7 News requested an interview, Margaret didn't hesitate. She sat in her modest living room, surrounded by 30 years' worth of Emily's photos, clutching the senior portrait that had become the face of the missing girl case. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. They told me she probably ran away, Margaret said directly into the camera. The police, the school, even some of my own neighbors. They said teenage girls do that sometimes, that she'd probably come home when she was ready. The reporter leaned forward. But you never believe that? A mother knows her child. Emily wasn't the type to run away from problems, she was the type to face them head-on. She was planning to study journalism in college because she wanted to tell the truth and help people, she always said. Margaret's voice broke slightly. She found out about something wrong at school, and she was trying to fix it. And someone finished her for it. Mrs. Vaughn, the Whitaker family's attorneys have issued statements denying any connection to your daughter's disappearance. They've called these allegations baseless conspiracy theories fueled by grief. Margaret's eyes flashed with an anger that had been building for 3 decades. Let them call it what they want. My daughter is no more because she tried to stop them from cheating. That boy took someone else's future, and Emily died trying to make it right. The interview aired that evening despite legal threats. By the next morning, Margaret had received 6 phone calls from lawyers demanding she retract her statements. But Margaret Vaughn had waited 30 years for someone to listen to her. She wasn't backing down now. Meanwhile, Detective Chen was getting pressure from her own department. Captain Morrison called her into his office the day after the interview aired. Chen, I'm getting calls from the mayor's office, the district attorney, even the state police. Everyone wants to know why we're pursuing a 30-year-old case based on what might be fabricated evidence. Captain, we have the victim's dress, video evidence, and a written confession from a witness. A witness who's been missing for 30 years and might be making up stories to cover her own involvement. Detective Chen stared at her superior in disbelief. Sir, are you ordering me to close this investigation? Captain Morrison looked uncomfortable. I'm ordering you to proceed very carefully. Make sure your evidence is solid before you make any arrests. We can't afford to look foolish going after prominent families based on questionable evidence. That afternoon, Detective Chen received word that the FBI had located Rachel Linwood. She was living in Portland, Oregon, under the name Rebecca Lawrence. She'd agreed to return to testify. The truth was coming out, despite the Whitakers' best efforts to bury it again. But Detective Chen couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. While the media storm raged outside, Clara Reynolds found herself drawn back to the school's archives. Something had been nagging at her since watching the camcorder footage, a detail that everyone else seemed to have missed in the chaos of revelations and legal threats. She pulled the 1995 yearbook from its place on the shelf, its burgundy cover faded but still intact. The pages crackled as she opened it, releasing the familiar scent of old paper and teenage dreams frozen in time. Clara had looked through this yearbook hundreds of times over the years, usually when former students visited or during memorial services. But now she was searching for something specific, something that had flickered at the edge of her consciousness while watching Emily's final moments on camera. The prom photos were in the back section, page after page of awkward poses and forced smiles. But Clara wasn't looking at the main subjects of the photos anymore. She was studying the backgrounds, the edges, the spaces where people thought no one was looking. And there he was. In photo after photo, always partially obscured, always at the edges of the frame, was the same figure. A young man with a camera of his own, capturing the same moments from different angles. But he wasn't part of the official photography crew, Clara knew because she'd been the faculty advisor who had hired the professional photographer that year. She grabbed a magnifying glass from her desk drawer, studying the figure more closely. Tall, thin, with dark hair that fell across his forehead. In one photo, she could just make out his profile. He looked familiar, but she couldn't quite place him. Clara flipped to the senior portraits section, scanning the faces methodically. There, Benjamin Whitaker. Daniel's younger cousin, a junior that year who should have graduated in 1996. Her hands trembling, Clara reached for the phone and called Detective Chen. Detective, I found something. In the 1995 yearbook, there was a second photographer at prom. Someone who wasn't officially hired by the school. Go on. Benjamin Whitaker. Daniel's cousin? He's in the background of multiple prom photos with his own camera, but we never hired him to take pictures. Detective Chen was quiet for a moment. You think he was documenting something? Creating evidence? Or covering it up? Detective, if Benjamin was filming that night and caught what happened after Emily's confrontation, we need to find him. What's his last known address? Clara was already pulling files. According to our records, Benjamin Whitaker never graduated. He stopped attending classes in September 1995, just 4 months after prom. His emergency contact information shows he moved out of state with his aunt. Within hours, Detective Chen had contacted Interpol. The search didn't take long. Benjamin Whitaker had been living under his own name in Sao Paulo, Brazil, for the past 20 years. He'd built a life as a freelance photographer, specializing in documentary work for international humanitarian organizations. But when Brazilian authorities approached him, they found more than just a photographer hiding from his past. In Benjamin's apartment, carefully preserved in a climate-controlled safe, was a second camcorder, one that had been recording that night from a completely different angle. Benjamin Whitaker agreed to return to the United States voluntarily, bringing with him the footage that had haunted him for 3 decades. The tape was digitized in the same lab that had processed Emily's camcorder. This time, the audience in the conference room included the district attorney, Detective Chin, and a federal prosecutor who had taken interest in the case due to its interstate implications. The new footage began where Emily's had ended. The camera angle showed the school's main entrance from across the parking lot, partially hidden behind a row of cars. Benjamin had been filming secretly, and the timestamp showed 10:52 p.m., 5 minutes after Emily's confrontation had been cut short. On screen, Emily appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. Daniel Whitaker was with her, along with 2 other young men who were clearly older, college-aged rather than high school seniors. One had the build of an athlete, the other wore an expensive suit that looked out of place at a high school prom. Emily was backing away from them, her hands raised defensively. The letter she'd been holding was gone. Even through the grainy footage, her terror was visible. The audio was clearer on this tape. Daniel's voice came through distinctly. "You should have minded your own business, Emily. My father gave you a chance to walk away." "I'm not afraid of your father," Emily replied, but her voice was shaking. "People deserve to know the truth. People deserve what we tell them they deserve," one of the older men said. His voice carried an authority that suggested he was used to being obeyed. The footage didn't show Emily's death, but it showed the aftermath. At 11:03 p.m., the 3 men reappeared on camera. They were carrying something heavy wrapped in what looked like a tarp. They moved purposefully toward the back of the school, toward the maintenance shed that had been scheduled for renovation that summer. The camera followed them as far as it could, but the angle was wrong to see exactly what they were doing. What it did capture was the sound, the rhythmic scraping of shovels against dirt, the quiet conversation of men burying evidence. At 11:47 p.m., the 3 men emerged again, their formal clothes dirty, their hands stained with soil. Daniel looked younger than his 18 years, shaken by what he just participated in. But the older men moved with the confidence of people who had cleaned up messes before. The final timestamp on Benjamin's tape was 11:52 p.m. The last image was of Daniel Whitaker straightening his tie and walking back toward the gymnasium, ready to resume his prom as if nothing had happened. Detective Chin stopped the tape and looked around the room. "We need to excavate that maintenance shed immediately." The federal prosecutor nodded. "And we need to identify those 2 older men. They weren't students. They were adults who came to that prom specifically to commit this crime." Clara Reynolds, who had been silent throughout the viewing, finally spoke. "Benjamin Whitaker filmed his own cousin committing this crime, and then ran away to another country rather than report it. 30 years of guilt," Detective Chin said quietly. "That's why he kept the tape. He knew someday he'd have to face what he'd witnessed." The truth was finally complete. Emily Vaughn hadn't just discovered academic fraud, she'd stumbled onto a conspiracy that reached far beyond the high school. And the people who finished her had been confident enough in their power to bury her right on school grounds, knowing that no one would ever dare to look. The excavation began at dawn on a crisp October morning, exactly 6 months after Clara Reynolds had discovered the trunk in the basement. The maintenance shed behind Lincoln High School was surrounded by police tape, forensic teams, and the kind of heavy machinery usually reserved for major construction projects. Margaret Vaughn stood at the perimeter, supported by her nephew who had driven down from Chicago for the occasion. At 73, she had waited 30 years for this moment, and despite her frail appearance, nothing could have kept her away. Detective Chin approached the elderly woman gently. "Mrs. Vaughn, you don't have to stay for this. We can call you when we find something." Margaret's grip tightened on her nephew's arm. "I've been waiting 30 years to bring my baby home. I'm not leaving now." The forensic team worked methodically, removing decades of accumulated debris from around the shed's foundation. By noon, they had reached the original concrete base and begun the careful process of excavation beneath it. At 2:17 p.m., the call came from the lead forensic investigator. "Detective Chin, you need to see this." Beneath the shed's foundation, exactly where Benjamin Whitaker's footage had indicated, they found a shallow grave. The remains were wrapped in what had once been a plastic tarp, now degraded but still partially intact. Inside, forensic specialists carefully uncovered fabric that matched the emerald green dress from the trunk. But it was the forensic odontologist who provided the final confirmation. "Dental records are a perfect match. This is Emily Vaughn." Margaret Vaughn collapsed into her nephew's arms, 30 years of grief finally finding release in tears that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Within hours of the discovery, FBI agents were executing arrest warrants. Daniel Whitaker Jr., now 48 and serving as CEO of Whitaker Industries, was taken into custody at his downtown office. The media had gathered outside the gleaming corporate building, and footage of his perp walk became the lead story on every news channel. Rachel Linwood, now Rebecca Lawrence, had returned from Oregon 2 weeks earlier and was already in protective custody. Her testimony, combined with the camcorder footage and Benjamin Whitaker's evidence, created an unbreakable case. The two older men from Benjamin's footage had been identified through facial recognition and old newspaper photos. They were Jonathan Whitaker Sr.'s business associates, men who had made careers out of making problems disappear for wealthy clients. Both were arrested at their respective homes, their decades of confidence in their untouchability finally shattered. But it was Benjamin Whitaker's testimony that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. He had returned from Brazil voluntarily, carrying not just the tape but 30 years of guilt that had eaten away at him. "I was 17, he told the packed courtroom during Daniel's trial. "I looked up to my older cousin, and when he asked me to film the prom for fun, I didn't question it. But when I saw what happened to Emily, I was too scared to speak up. My uncle controlled everything in this town, the police, the mayor, the newspapers. I knew if I said anything, I'd end up like Emily." The trial lasted 6 weeks and dominated national news. Rachel's testimony was devastating in its detail, describing not just the academic fraud but the systematic corruption that had allowed the Whitaker family to control the town for decades. Marcus Williams, now 48 and working as a high school principal in Detroit, flew back to testify about the scholarship that had been stolen from him. His voice broke as he described how losing that opportunity had changed the entire trajectory of his life. "Emily died trying to give me back my future," he said from the witness stand. "The least I can do is tell the truth about why she was finished." The verdict came on a Friday afternoon in March. Daniel Whitaker Jr. was found guilty of first-degree finishing and conspiracy. His two accomplices received life sentences without parole. The business empire that had controlled the town for generations began to crumble as federal investigators uncovered decades of corruption, bribery, and intimidation. 3 months later, Lincoln High School held a memorial service for Emily Vaughn. The small plaque in the trophy case was replaced with a larger memorial garden behind the school, where her remains had finally been found. Clara Reynolds, now retired, spoke at the dedication ceremony. "Emily Vaughn was 17 years old when she chose to stand up for what was right, knowing it might cost her everything. She paid the ultimate price for that courage, but her truth finally won." Margaret Vaughn, dressed in the same black dress she'd worn to search for her daughter for 30 years, placed a bouquet of white roses on Emily's new gravestone. The inscription read, "Emily Vaughn, 1977 to 1995. She told the truth." As the ceremony ended and the crowd dispersed, Margaret remained by the grave, finally able to say the words she'd carried for 3 decades. "You kept your promise, baby," she whispered to the marble headstone. "You told the truth." The Whitaker family's reign of corruption was over. Emily Vaughn's voice, silenced at 17, had finally been heard. And in a small town that had learned to fear the truth, justice had arrived 30 years late, but it had arrived nonetheless. Clara Reynolds walked slowly back to her car, knowing that some secrets are too powerful to stay buried forever. Sometimes the truth just needs the right person to dig deep enough to find it.